Well, still on President Bola Tinubu's call on state governors to do more with their federal allocations and enhance development in their state, we now have joining us in the studio Arise News analyst and lawyer, Frank Tietie. Welcome to Arise News, and thanks for joining me on Newsnight.
My pleasure.
Now, let's talk about what the president has been saying. He's emphasizing that governors own the land and the job is in their hands. What are your thoughts on expecting state governors to lead the charge on food security, given sort of the current challenges we have in agriculture, such as funding, security, infrastructure deficits, and what have you?
I hope the president is not trying to find an alibi for also not doing what is expected of him. I think if the president is doing fantastically well about these issues, then he can serve as an example and say that he is pointing the way to governors to say, see what I'm doing in the federal government, and then you emulate so that you don't frustrate my efforts in trying to improve the living standard of Nigerians.
He's sort of saying, look, we've created an avenue, we've created some policies, we've created some ways where we've saved some money, and so now the states have more money, and so they should do better, don't you think?
I don't think so. I think it becomes an excuse for not doing what he was supposed to do. Let's look at it. The president's, famous subsidy is gone statement on the day of inauguration heralded something very cataclysmic for the Nigerian economy, which dovetailed to things that, that is sort of topsy-turvy situation for many Nigerians economically. One would have expected, and we must congratulate Nigerians that we were able to actually see through those very, turbulent period. Now, many Nigerians believed President Tinubu when he said, because we had always said, oh, there's this campaign, subsidies is scam. So, and then we've had a history that when subsidy was removed, it certainly led to certain savings, which translated immediately to infrastructural development. By who? Was it by the state government? It was by the federal government. Federal government was responsible for removing subsidy. Federal government was responsible for collecting the savings. So did we have a historical precedent for gathering this money and determining a certain portion of it to go to the states so that states can now be used as, as an excuse for not doing what you ought to do? So I say this within a historical context because the first time this happened, it was under General Sani Abacha, when petrol subsidy was removed to the extent that it caused the price of PMS to move from 11 naira to 15 naira. And then here we saw General Abacha's regime, establishing the Petroleum Trust Fund and putting a court fellow, General Buhari, for a retired, to be in charge. Nigerians immediately saw the benefits of PTF. You could go to hospitals and see that PTF was responsible for buying syringes and antiseptic soap, and then constructing roads and doing all sort of projects in universities. The entire federation immediately felt the savings that came from the removal of subsidy under General Sani Abacha. The same thing under Shopee, and that's the reason why they cried to high heavens to President Tinubu that, please, this idea of wanting to share monies to governors that have been, very profligate. They have a history of profligacy. Not only this set, it's our Nigerian thing. It won't translate to anything. So does the president want to say he didn't heed those warnings? Don't. So those monies that were given to the states, have not really translated to anything. So nothing really has actually been achieved. So I think the call from the president is, he's our president, so let's treat him with much respect. It's akin to mischief that you could have done, this thing. You could have done all of these things with the monies, but you passed them to certain persons who had a clear record of not being able to perform.
Well, now the monies have been passed to the governors.
The monies have been spent, they've been frittered.
Let's talk about agricultural policies. If you take a look at Kwara states where we've seen like some bumper harvest being exported due to some currency strengths. It's now been raising questions about policy gaps. Is it time, in your opinion, for sort of a more cohesive federal-state strategy on when you look to things of agricultural exports and how this could impact Nigeria's food security?
Well, yes, indeed. I don't. We are not essentially, generally, a food exporting country. We are more of a food importing country. But if we are exporting certain products that are now, certain agricultural products that are in the neighborhood or in the description of cash crops that can generate foreign exchange, that's fantastic. We have more than enough agencies that coordinate exports, apart from the Nigerian Export Promotion Council. But we need to look at a situation where the central bank will play an important role. Because in a situation where persons invest in agriculture for the purpose of export, the returns should be directly commensurate to what they have put in. And I think we should be looking at, such dollars not being retained by CBN, but actually coming directly to the state. So we can see it empowering these farmers who now become, so let's create more billionaires from farming. So, and that can happen when the exchange policy and the remittances are done in such a way that will favor the farmers. So, but in terms of coordination of exports, it's a federal affair. So, in terms of also giving incentives to state governors, by state governors, I wonder how, because the essence is that despite the fact that our GDP is largely it's largely dependent on agriculture, even though petroleum is our main stay in terms of export. It is expected that state governors can give incentives, because generally we are not seeing that kind of subsidies being paid to farmers across Nigeria. But I think the federal government should do that. Unfortunately, the interventions of the federal government in the past have actually turned out to not to have been very progressive. They have not been very productive.
All right, beyond state governors, my former guest, Dr. Emeka, was talking about how we also need to shine the torchlight on local government. And you have the president reassuring the governors that, look, this local government autonomy will not undermine the governor's control. But critics might argue that the tension between their autonomy and collaboration could then hinder grassroots development. How can this balance be practically achieved?
I think because of the smorgasbord of developmental needs that we have in our country, which creates the peculiarity of each local government different needs. The expectation is that where there is more money for local governments as a result of the direct payments of allocations to them, it is expected that those problems will be immediately tackled. So it's a good development. Local governors really, because of the constitutional clarity of the functions of local government, it's clear that local government are supposed to deal with those things that touch on the people, the markets, the cemeteries, the schools, and all of that, and then building car parks, motor parks, things that really touch on quality of life. And then to a large extent, but in terms of providing security, and then a functional transportation system within a state, I think it would be too much to rely on the local governments to provide that. So in providing, ensuring that trunk B roads and are well maintained across the entire state. So these are issues that the state governors should provide. Unfortunately, should deal with and provide essentially. Unfortunately, it's not the case. I think that the call from the president to the governors, if it were specific to agriculture, I think it would be misplaced, because the real problems Nigerians are facing are within the areas of security, and then transportation, and then housing. So, and these are things that the president, the federal government, I would say, could have easily, with a very sound policy, as we have had in history, because even under the former administration of President Shehu Shagari, we've seen direct interventions of the federal government, even in local government development, in building of local housing, in building of, I would say, development housing estate across the various states by the federal government.
Speaking
and not necessarily
of direct,
by expecting that the local government or
speaking
the
of direct investments and people-focused interventions, we had the vice president talking about the economy turning a corner and Nigerians beginning to smile soon, like they've all been saying. But we still have inflation at an all-time high, structural reforms that are causing pain in the country. Do you share his optimism, or like you said, is there more need for these immediate people-focused interventions?
Oh, yes, indeed. I think that we are missing it. And we're missing it. Because one way thought that when the scam of subsidy was stopped by the removal of subsidy, there will be immediate translation to these economic gains. Now investing in areas that will, spur growth, especially in our areas of comparative advantage, particularly in agriculture. We haven't seen that. So we still remain so much of an import, a country that imports food. However, it's important that this kind of optimism should come to the people, to the ordinary Nigerians. But here we are, more monies that are being given to state governments, and then more party patrons having more money because they have access to government, coffers or government operators. So that's not productivity. So because once you just go there to the state governor and he's able to dole out money and then people spend without producing, So we should look at, again, go back to those areas in this country where we have various forms of comparative advantage, whether in the north or in the south or in the southeast, where we could have had a lot of investment in creating industrial cottages. I hope that Professor Soludo will keep to his promise in such transformation. We've seen that in Abia State, quite all right. Aba is turning to something else, and we've seen some of the things. This clothes and this dress is from Aba, and everyone I've worn here who actually came from Aba. And I'm serious about that. So you make such investment in branding and then opening up, and then why can't we actually subsidize these industries? Why can't Innocent be subsidized, for example?
Tietie, thank you so much. We'll leave it there and we'll continue this conversation another time.